Richard talked about you tonight like you were still the best thing that ever happened to him. Jake continued, gentler now. He didn't call his assistant to pick you up. He called the guy he trusts most in that whole building, because he wanted to know you were safe with somebody good. That's not nothing, Diane. A man doesn't hand you off to someone he trusts, unless some part of him is still trying to take care of you, even from a distance, even badly. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The rain thinned to a drizzle. Somewhere in the quiet, Diane exhaled a breath that seemed to release something she'd been holding for years. I don't even know how we got here, she finally said. 22 years old when I married him. I used to think we'd talk forever, about everything, and somewhere along the way we started talking about everything except the things that mattered. So talk to him about the things that matter, Jake said. Tonight, if you can stand it. Not to fix 20 years in one conversation, just to start. He's sitting in an office right now, stressed out of his mind about a client call. And somewhere underneath that, I'd bet money he's just as lonely as you are, and just as unsure how to say it. She was quiet the rest of the drive, watching the city slide past. And when Jake pulled up outside the Hendricks house, a handsome brick colonial with a porch light glowing gold against the dark, she didn't move to get out right away. Thank you, she said, for not taking what I offered, and for not making me feel small for offering it. You're not small, Jake said. You're a woman who forgot for a while that she still matters. That's different. That's fixable. She smiled then, small and real, and something in her face looked lighter than it had all evening. Lily's lucky, she said. Whatever broke you into becoming this man, she's lucky it happened. Jake watched her walk up the path, watched the front door open before she reached it. Richard silhouetted in the doorway, phone still in his hand from whatever call he'd rushed off of, worry written plainly across his face. Worry for her, Jake realized, worry that had nothing to do with logistics or timing and everything to do with a man who still loved his wife and didn't fully know how to show it anymore. Jake watched Richard reach for her hand before she'd even crossed the threshold. Watched Diane pause and actually take it, and something in that small, unremarkable gesture felt like it mattered more than anything dramatic could have. He drove to his sister's to collect Lily, who was asleep on the couch with a picture book open on her chest, mouth slightly parted, one sock missing. He carried her out to the car, buckled her into her booster seat without waking her, and sat for a moment in the driver's seat before starting the engine, feeling something settle in his chest that he didn't have a word for yet. Not quite pride, not quite relief, something closer to the quiet satisfaction of a man who has been tested in a way no one else would ever know about, and had not failed. Monday morning, Richard stopped by his cubicle again, and this time there was no anxiety in his face at all, just something warmer, steadier. Diane told me what you said to her, he said quietly. Not the specifics, just that you talked her into coming home to actually talk to me instead of running from it. We stayed up until 2 in the morning. Feels like we've got 20 years of conversations to catch up on. He put a hand on Jake's shoulder, and his voice caught just slightly. I don't know how to thank you for that. You already did, Jake said. Every time you covered for me without making me feel small for needing it. This makes us even. Richard shook his head. No, this makes me a man who's going to remember for the rest of my life that the guy in the passenger seat of my marriage that night was somebody worth trusting with everything. He cleared his throat, straightened, and in his familiar booming voice added, also, Diane wants you and Lily over for dinner Saturday. She says it's non-negotiable. Jake smiled, feeling something in him that had been braced for a long time finally. Quietly unclench. He thought about the version of that night that could have happened. The version where loneliness met loneliness and called it fate, and how easily that story could have ended in wreckage. A job lost, a friendship destroyed, a good man's trust burned to nothing, and worst of all, a daughter growing up, believing that this was simply what men did when no one was watching. Instead, he'd driven a stranger home through the rain, and somehow, without meaning to, he'd helped save a marriage instead of breaking one, and in doing so, he'd proven something to himself that he hadn't fully known until that night. That the man Lily was growing up watching wasn't just trying to be good. He already was. That Saturday, Lily sat at the Hendricks kitchen table coloring, while the adults talked and laughed, over a dinner that ran long into the evening, and at one point Diane caught Jake's eye across the table and gave him a small, Grateful nod that needed no words at all. Some favors, Jake thought, cost you nothing and give you everything. And some nights that seem, at first, like temptation dressed up as kindness, turn out instead to be the exact moment a person finds out who they really are.
The rain in Portland that November had a way of finding every gap in a person's coat, and 11-year-old Emma Carter had long since stopped trying to keep it out. She sat on the concrete step outside First Cascade Bank, knees pulled to her chest, a threadbare blanket draped over her shoulders, that smelled faintly of the shelter's industrial detergent, though she hadn't slept there in 3 nights. The shelter had a rule about staying past 90 days, and Emma had learned that rules, however kindly meant, didn't bend for an 11-year-old girl with nowhere else to go. In her coat pocket, wrapped in a plastic sandwich bag to keep it dry, was a bank card. It was scratched, the numbers on its face nearly worn to nothing. The name beneath them faded, but still legible if you tilted it right. Margaret E. Carter. It had belonged to her grandmother, and it was the only thing of hers Emma had left, because everything else, the house, the furniture, the photographs in their careful albums, had been sold or seized or simply lost in the 6 months since her grandmother's. Heart had stopped in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Emma's parents were not in the picture. Her mother had left before Emma could form real memories of her, and her father had spent more of Emma's childhood behind the walls of Coffee Creek Correctional than outside them. It had been her grandmother, Margaret, who raised her, a retired schoolteacher with a small pension, a smaller house, and an enormous capacity for love that had made up for every other thing Emma lacked. When Margaret died, there had been no next of kin willing or able to take Emma in, and the foster system, overwhelmed and understaffed, had lost track of her somewhere between one placement and the next. She had run from the second group home after a boy. Twice her size had made staying there feel more dangerous than the street. That had been 4 months ago. She kept the card because it was the last physical trace of her grandmother's name, and some nights when the cold made sleep impossible, she would take it out of its plastic bag, just to hold something that had once been in her grandmother's hands. That Thursday, hunger had made her bold. She had heard other kids at the shelter talk about how bank cards sometimes still worked even after someone died, if nobody had gotten around to closing the account. And though some rational part of her suspected this was nonsense, desperation has never been especially interested in probability. She pushed open the heavy glass door of First Cascade Bank and walked to the automated teller in the lobby, small and soaked and shivering, and inserted the card with hands that trembled from cold more than nerves. The machine's screen blinked, processed, and then did something Emma didn't expect. Instead of the usual insufficient funds message she'd braced for, it displayed, "Please see a teller. Account requires manual verification." A security guard, a heavy-set man in his 50s named Walter Higgins, who had worked the lobby of First Cascade for 11 years and had seen every kind of desperate person try, every kind of desperate scheme, started toward her with the practiced weariness of a man who'd confiscated 100 stolen cards. But something made him slow his steps. It was the way she held the card, not defiantly, not with the quick, guilty motions of a thief, but gently, like it was something sacred. "Where'd you get this, sweetheart?" he asked, crouching to her eye level, his voice softer than his bulk suggested. "It was my grandma's," Emma said, and her chin trembled, though she fought it fiercely. "She died. I just wanted to see if maybe there was still something on it. I wasn't going to steal anything. I'm really hungry." Walter looked at the card, at the name Margaret E. Carter, and something in his memory stirred uneasily, though he couldn't place why. He escorted her, gently, one hand not quite touching her shoulder, to the desk of the branch manager, a woman named Susan Whitfield, who had run this branch for 9 years and possessed the particular exhausted compassion of someone who had spent a career watching money reveal exactly who people were. Susan typed the account number into her system, expecting to find nothing but zeros, expecting to have the grim task of telling this soaked, shivering child that whatever remained of her grandmother's money belonged now to the state, tangled in probate, out of reach. Instead, the screen returned something that made her go very still. The account was not empty. It was not, in fact, remotely close to empty. It held a balance of $340,000, along with a linked trust account, flagged with a legal hold and a note in the system referencing an attached will on file with a local law firm, Hartley and Voss, attorneys at law, instructing that in the event of Margaret Carter's death, the entire estate was to be held in trust for her granddaughter, Emma Rose Carter, until the child could be located and identified. Susan stared at the number for a long moment, then looked up at the girl sitting across from her, damp and small and utterly unaware that she was, in the plainest financial sense, wealthy, and had been, without knowing it, for 6 months while she slept in shelters and doorways, and once for 2 terrifying nights in the stairwell of a parking garage. "Emma," Susan said carefully, "can you tell me your grandmother's full name and yours? And do you know if there was ever a lawyer she talked about, someone named Hartley? Maybe?" Emma frowned, digging through memory. "Grandma used to say if anything ever happened to her, I should go find Mr. Hartley. He had papers for me. But I didn't know where his office was. I looked for a while, but I didn't have a phone or anything. And I got scared, and then I didn't know what else to do." It took Susan less than 20 minutes on the phone to confirm what the screen had already told her. Margaret Carter, in the last years of her life, had quietly and deliberately built a modest but meaningful nest egg, decades of careful saving. A small life insurance payout from Emma's grandfather's passing years earlier, and the sale proceeds of a piece of land she'd inherited from her own mother. All of it placed into trust for her granddaughter, guarded by an attorney who had been trying, without success, to locate the child ever since the foster system lost track of her. Hartley had filed reports. He had hired a private investigator for a month before the retainer ran dry. He had, in his own words when Susan finally reached him by phone, lost more sleep over this case than any other in 30 years of practice, terrified that the girl he was legally bound to protect had simply vanished into the machinery of a broken system. While they waited for Hartley to arrive, he left his office the moment he heard. Driving 40 minutes through, rain-slicked traffic with his hands, shaking on the wheel, Susan did something that wasn't strictly in her job description. She walked Emma to the small break room in the back of the branch, made her a cup of hot cocoa from the machine meant for employees, and sat with her while she ate a granola, bar retrieved from someone's desk drawer, and just talked to her like she was a person and not a problem to be processed. "Your grandma sounds like she really loved you," Susan said. Emma nodded, staring into the cocoa like it might disappear if she looked away. "She used to say I was the best thing that ever happened to her. I didn't really believe her. I believed she believed it, but I always figured that's just what grandmas say. I think," Susan said carefully, "that some people say things like that because they're being nice. And some people say it because it's just true, and they need you to know it before they run out of time to say it. I think your grandmother was the second kind.